Welcome back to the channel. This will be the best wildcard team for Gameweek 30. I made one of these podcasts last week, but this will be an updated version with some key changes, not just in terms of the structure, but also kind of covering certain injuries that have happened over the international break. So this will be a full 50-man squad with no yellow flags, international break sort of injuries or concerns going into the Gameweek 30 deadline, which is next Tuesday. There will be a deadline stream there, so all your questions will be answered. And there will be an updated transfer tips podcast as well, my own team selection where I start to hone in on my final transfers. One move has already been made and I might even take a -4 hit or use the wildcard chip because a lot of yellow flags and issues are still in my team going into Gameweek 30. Like this video, subscribe to the channel and also hit that notification bell so you don't miss a single upload or live stream for both FPL and UCL Fantasy, and check all the links in the description below for my Patreon and the championships, for early access to my videos, amongst many other perks, the Discord server, FPL League, Spotify, and much more can be found in the description. But without further ado, let's jump straight into it. Price changes have remained fairly stagnant during this international break, but my squad value has gone up slightly over the last couple of days to 104.3 million overall. So I've got 0.2 million in the bank, and in terms of my 50-man squad, it's approximately 104.1 million, but I'll be discussing alternatives as we go along in each position, and a lot depends on your chip strategy. I have made a guide for the best time to use every single chip very recently, so be sure to check that out. I think that's very important in determining what you should wildcard to. For example, if you aren't planning to free hit in Gameweek 34, you might also have to be conscious about not being down to 10 men in terms of your goalkeepers. Maybe both of them will blank or are very likely to, so going for Jose Sa or a goalkeeper that's confirmed to play might be the best way to approach blank Gameweek 34 from that particular perspective, but then others might be looking to free hit in such a blank game week. So that's where the chip strategies are very important, but this squad is versatile and will help you tackle all the blanks and doubles in a very strong way. But of course, you can fine-tune certain aspects of this squad to your liking and chip strategies. Let's start off with the two goalkeepers, and there are a few changes between the sticks. There are three standout goalkeepers at the moment, and Jordan Pickford isn't one of them, with Everton's fixtures looking quite poor on paper for the next couple of weeks. But one of Raya or Sells should do the job until the end of the season. Both of them are likely to blank in Gameweek 34, and that depends on the FA Cup results. So if Nottingham Forest win against Brighton in the FA Cup quarterfinals, they will both blank in 34 and double in 33. And in the case of Arsenal and Crystal Palace, they will both blank in 34 and double in 33 if Crystal Palace beat Fulham in the FA Cup quarterfinals. That has all been covered in videos like my chip strategy guide, so be sure to check that out so you've got all the information you need, and you can see how the FA Cup quarterfinals will be crucial in determining blank Gameweek 34 and also double Gameweek 33 as a result. But David Raya is still a great option between the sticks, and if you pair him with a Jose Sa, for example, that could work very well in terms of navigating blank Gameweek 34 without the use of the free hit. And Arsenal are worth investing defensively with a Gabriel there, Saliba, and even other options like Timber. But David Raya offers a safe pair of hands between the sticks, and I think he's a very solid choice. It also saves you a bit of money when you combine him and a Forest defender, for example, compared to Sells and Gabriel, which I discussed in my original wildcard video from last week. But the backup goalkeeper this time is Areola, and as mentioned before, if you don't have the free hit and you're looking to navigate blank Gameweek 34, this could be a mistake, so to speak, especially if Crystal Palace beat Fulham in the FA Cup quarterfinals, which would mean Arsenal blank in 34, and you would be down to 10 men with both Areola and Raya. At least that's the most likely scenario. And maybe a goalkeeper like Jose Sa, who went up in price recently to 4.4 million, might be the safe play there as your backup goalkeeper. But if you are free hitting in Gameweek 34, I think a goalkeeper pairing of Raya and Areola will be very solid. One of the standout defenders right now is Daniel Munoz, who went up in price during this international break to 5.1 million, but will his minutes be a slight concern in Gameweek 30 against Southampton away, with Colombia having just played against Paraguay, and you've got the FA Cup quarterfinals this weekend where I think Munoz will play, so you could see his minutes managed over the next couple of matches, and Gameweek 30 might be a prime time for him to be subbed off earlier or maybe not start the game at all. But I'm still fairly confident Munoz will play, but that weekend game in the FA Cup against Fulham will be very crucial in determining how his minutes will be managed going down the line. So that's something to monitor. But as things stand, I think Munoz is a great option to start in Gameweek 30, and for sure, if you haven't got him already, he's a great investment for double Game Week 32 as well, and Crystal Palace are showing great form, particularly on their travels, so another clean sheet is possible against Southampton away. Next up is Aït-Nouri. I'm not a huge fan of him, but Wolves still have some good fixtures until blank Game Week 34, and if you are looking to navigate that without the use of the free hit, a player like Aït-Nouri could be very useful. But you've also got Agbadou, who is significantly cheaper than Aït-Nouri, but doesn't offer the same attacking threat, and Jose Sarr between the sticks at 4.4 million, but I would not be doubling up on Wolves defensively. I know they've got the second most clean sheets since Vitor Pereira was appointed, but I still don't trust them defensively enough to go for that sort of double up. One would be enough, and only teams like Arsenal and Nottingham Forest, in my opinion, are worth doubling up on defensively at the moment. But speaking of which, I would go for Milenkovic and having that Forest defensive coverage. And before, like I mentioned last week, in that kind of combination of Gabriel and Sells, that is significantly more expensive than Raya and Milenkovic. So you need to be quite wary about that. If you've got a lot of funds at your disposal and can afford that sort of upgrade, so to speak, then that is definitely a nice combination to have. But otherwise, Raya and Milenkovic saves you a bit of money there, and you're still covering Arsenal and Nottingham Forest defensively. And if you still need to go even cheaper, Nico Williams is a decent punt, but he won't offer the same attacking threat as Milenkovic, which we saw in blank Game Week 29, where he scored and assisted against Ipswich Town. Now, there is also this Bournemouth defensive kind of conundrum and coverage question. Do you go for Kepa in goal, or one of Kerkez or Howson? For those with a lot of value tied up in Kerkez, I'd highly recommend keeping him on the wildcard, but for those that haven't invested in him like myself, he costs 5.2 million, so that is quite steep in my opinion, and he's probably not worth that specific price tag at the moment. And you can save plenty of money by going for Dean Howson instead, who hasn't been great in FPL terms in recent weeks, but he's still a worthwhile investment. He costs 4.5 million, and Bournemouth have been very surprising this season with some great performances, more clean sheets than I expected, but there has been a drop-off recently, and Bournemouth have also struggled in terms of results and performances. Even some of their fans aren't happy, but if you look at the bigger picture and how they've performed all season, it's still very impressive, and they can still finish in a European spot for next season. But the final defender is looking at double Game Week 32, and whilst Dan Burn is a solid choice, he is on 8 yellow cards. 2 more would mean he gets to the 10 yellow card mark and a 2-game suspension as a result, and you have to wait until Newcastle played their 32nd league game until you're safe in terms of those suspension risks. But if you want to avoid that completely, then go for Livramento, who costs 4.5 million, but Dan Burn at 4.4 million is another solid choice. You can't go wrong with either of them, and if you've got enough squad depth, you don't need to worry too much about having 1 or 2 suspension risks in your 15-man squad. So I think both of them are absolutely fine, but I've gone for Livramento this time round. Let me know your thoughts down in the comment section below. Perhaps you want to go a bit left field and pick Nick Pope between the sticks as well. But I have to say, Newcastle have a more appealing double than Crystal Palace, especially from a defensive perspective, and a superior Game Week 31 fixture. So Nick Pope over Dean Henderson might be the underrated play, so to speak, but he's also more expensive, and Dean Henderson has been one of the best performing goalkeepers this season. And for those that are looking to double up on Palace defensively, I probably wouldn't recommend that. It looks great for Game Week 30 against Southampton away, but even for the double in Game Week 32, facing Newcastle and Man City away, I don't think a clean sheet is banked in for Crystal Palace. Having said that, I would still go for a second or third Crystal Palace asset. You don't need to be too obsessive about having a triple up in Crystal Palace and Newcastle for the double, but that is obviously the preference and one of the plays you could do on your wildcard in Game Week 30. And Ismaila Sarr has shown some decent form recently. Over the course of the season, he has been fairly inconsistent, and the vast majority of his points and hauls came against Aston Villa in both matches. He loves playing against them, but against other opponents, he can sometimes struggle, even against the worst teams in the league. For example, he blanked against Southampton in the reverse fixture when I bought him, and it was Eze who scored and got a double-digit haul instead. And I think Eze might be the underrated differential play this week. He does cost significantly more than Ismaila Sarr, and that's a key reason why I think the Senegalese forward will be more appealing, and he's also out of position playing in the midfield. So there's a lot to like there. There's a high ceiling, and I think Sarr is capable of a big return in either Game Week 30 or 32, despite having some tough opponents on paper. Next up is Mohamed Salah. There are going to be some wildcard drafts without the Egyptian and then going for Erling Haaland, so that's kind of the sacrifice you make, but I would still highly recommend having the Egyptian here because he has been incredible all season, even in this international break, he has scored for his country and he has just been brilliant throughout the entire campaign. There have been a few slip-ups in the cup competitions, but I think you can forgive him for that. And he has carried that Liverpool attack on a lot of occasions this season. And in FPL terms, no one has come close, especially in the midfield. The likes of Cole Palmer, for example, have really fallen off a cliff in recent months, but Salah is still going to be in here. You can still have Erling Haaland at the same time, but it does mean a few sacrifices in other positions. For example, instead of going for Sels and Gabriel, which might be the preference, you go for Raya and Milenkovic, but it is ultimately team dependent and some people might have more budget at their disposal. Next up though is a budget option in Elanga. I don't think he's suddenly an amazing option and we need to go for him, but as an 8th attacker, he could be very useful in the coming weeks. And if you're also thinking about future doubles and blanks, you might also want to consider Morgan Rogers, for example. So Elanga's not the be-all and end-all. You can still go for a decent budget midfielder who can also help you navigate blank Gameweek 34 as one particular example. But Elanga is a decent choice. And if you are selling Chris Wood, who is currently an injury doubt, you can still cover Forest offensively with an Elanga who only cost 5.3 million. I was so close to buying him and Erling Haaland last week, and whilst I ended up getting more points from my transfers, I still think in the long run it would have been best if I bought Erling Haaland and Elanga, but things can change very quickly in FPL. Now, one of the recent price changes, which has seen another price increase, is Justin Kluivert, who now costs 6.3 million. That happened, I think, 2 days ago at the time of this recording, and there is a reason for that. His consistency has been brilliant. He's on penalties, decent underlying stats, and I think he's far better than Semenyo and the other Bournemouth options like Dango Ouattara, who will now be a rotation risk. We saw that happen in Gameweek 29 with Evanilson taking the nod up front. He's another decent option, the Brazilian, but I think Kluivert is still levels above the rest, and having 2 Bournemouth players is probably the sweet spot. I wouldn't recommend a triple up based on their recent form, and they also might not be the most useful for blank Gameweek 34, but that does depend on their FA Cup quarterfinal result against Manchester City as well. But finally, I'm going for a suspended player who you will bench this week and you'll have in place for double Gameweek 32, and that's Anthony Gordon. But you might even want to go for Jacob Murphy, especially if you're struggling for funds. There are different ways of playing this, but Gordon would be my preference in that Newcastle midfield. Jacob Murphy would be second. I don't think the other options like Tonali, Joelinton really stack up against these options long term. So Anthony Gordon is a nice way of having that double Newcastle attack and a triple up overall. Despite the fact you don't need a triple up in Crystal Palace and having 6 double Gameweek 32 doublers, I still think it's a nice play on the Gameweek 30 wildcard, and that's why Mateta features here. But if I'm picking 2 Crystal Palace assets and I have to remove one of them, it would be Sarr making way, because I think Mateta and Munoz are the best options they have to offer. And in terms of their respective positions, there's also probably less competition as opposed to Sarr competing that midfield with 5 midfielder slots, and you've got so many different options like Saka, who's coming back into the fray very soon, Cole Palmer if he's fit, and also Phil Foden as a 1-week punt, and many more that came from Bruno Fernandes is showing incredible form, the ones you see on screen, and there are plenty more where that came from. But in that forward line with all the injuries, suspensions and other factors, it is kind of like a very limited option at the moment, very limited pool of players in that forward line, and Mateta does stand out above most of the others. Even Chris Wood right now is an injury doubt, so moving from him to Mateta might be a decent play in Gameweek 30, but there is that question mark about the rotation risk, just like I said with Daniel Munoz earlier. And with Mateta just coming off the back of an injury, will he maybe be saved a little bit and you see Nketiah start in either the FA Cup this weekend or in Gameweek 30? That's something I have mentioned in my previous podcasts, and Mateta has been given the all clear to play. He is still yellow flag, but that should soon be removed after the Fulham game in the FA Cup quarterfinals, as long as nothing else happens in that particular match. But next up is Erling Haaland, and you can go for Marmoush as a cheaper option, and that allows you to go for a very balanced squad. The problem with having Haaland and Salah at the same time is you need to make compromises elsewhere, but it's still a very strong 50-man squad in my opinion. You've got decent squad depth, and with this setup, you will have benching headaches with the 5 midfielders and 3 forwards, because Alexander Isak also makes it into this team, and that's a Newcastle triple up. You've got 6 players doubling in Gameweek 32 and a decent platform for double Gameweek 33, blank Gameweek 34 and beyond, and you can fine tune a few things depending on your chip strategies. Like I mentioned earlier, are you free hitting in Game Week 34, or perhaps maybe earlier in 33, maybe later in the season? There's also the question of the bench boost, and a lot of times you kind of use the wildcard in conjunction with that particular chip. So there's a lot of different things to think about, and hopefully after watching all of my videos like the chip strategy guide and these wildcard podcasts, you have a great idea of what you want to do in terms of your transfers, your wildcard squads, and also the way you want to deploy every single chip until the end of the season. I would highly recommend use websites like FPL Team to visualize future transfers, compare different moves and strategies, because it really helps you when you visualize how your team looks like in future game weeks. So for Game Week 30, with this wildcard squad, you could have something like David Raya in goal and either Areola or Jose Sarr as your backup goalkeeper on the bench, a back three of Munoz, Howson and Milenkovic, with a strong midfield of Salah, Elanga, Kluivert and Ismaila Sarr, and a potent front line to say the least in Isak, Haaland and Mateta. The bench is also fairly solid with Areola, Aït-Nouri, Livramento and the suspended Anthony Gordon. The expected points is 57.7. It does go up slightly if you make a few changes, for example, like Aït-Nouri in for Howson, but I'd still recommend going for Howson instead. I think in terms of clean sheet chances this week, Bournemouth would be higher up, but maybe both of them end up conceding, as you'll see in my predictions as well in the deadline stream with different graphics being shown. With the captaincy, it's a very close call between Salah and Erling Haaland for me. You've also got other shouts like Isak, Cole Palmer, and others you'll see in future deadline streams and videos, but I think Haaland might take the nod here this week over Mohamed Salah. We saw how poor Leicester were against Man United in blank Game Week 29. Bruno Fernandes delivered a mega haul. I think Erling Haaland could score a brace or a hat-trick here because of how poor Leicester have been. Haaland scored against Israel in the Europe qualifiers. I think it was the World Cup qualifiers. So that is also something else to think about in terms of a bit of form there. But same with Salah. He scored for Egypt and got an assist, I believe, during the international break. And a lot of players are showing great form, but I do think it's a close call between those two. Salah has the advantage as a midfielder. He has shown more consistency all season. And what I mean by the midfield advantage is you get an extra point for scoring a goal and the clean sheet point as well, which Erling Haaland obviously won't be able to attain. But I really like this squad. It's balanced. If you don't like the look of certain things, for example, you can fine-tune them, as I mentioned before. And be sure to refer to my original wildcard video, because I did show a Haaland draft there, which you might prefer over this one. And I also showed a more balanced squad with no Erling Haaland. Marmoush takes his place instead. And you've got a really strong team all round with some very good options that are going under the radar still. They might have poor fixtures like Bruno Fernandes, but they still have the form to show for it. And they are worth including, or at least considering, for your FPL setups. But that is the wildcard team for Game Week 30 right now. If you have any questions, thoughts or comments, then leave them down in the comment section below, and be sure to check out all the links in the description below, like my Discord server, to continue the conversation even further. That wraps up another best wildcard team video for the season, this time out of Game Week 30, and what you see on screen are the clean sheet and over 2 goals odds for the upcoming deadline. Arsenal are top with the clean sheet odds with a 54% chance. The same goes for Liverpool, who do have an even better chance of scoring over 2 goals. Manchester City, Bournemouth, Crystal Palace and Wolves complete the top 6. And Leicester City, unsurprisingly, are bottom with their trip to the Etihad coming up next with a 6% chance of a clean sheet and a 5% probability of scoring over 2 goals. It's worth mentioning that the clean sheet odds are taken by fantasyfootballpundit.com. I've also referred to them in my UCL fantasy videos, and with the over 2 goals odds, they are taken by Draft Hounds. So maybe you disagree or agree with some of these selections, but that is what the odds are saying at the moment. Thank you very much for watching this video and listening to this podcast. If you enjoyed it or found it insightful, then like this video, subscribe to the channel, and also hit the notification bell so you don't miss a single upload or live stream for both FPL and UCL fantasy. Follow me on X, Instagram and Blue Sky, DylanRCM, and check all the links in the description below for my Patreon and the championships, for early access to my videos, amongst my other perks. The Discord server, FPL League, Spotify, and much more can be found in the description. I wish you all the best of luck for Game Week 30, and I'll see you next Tuesday for that deadline stream.